So while document design may not seem super important when it comes to a memo, a proposal memo, that seems like it should be pretty black and white, pretty straightforward, use headings. But document design is always something you should pay attention to. Even when you're writing a research paper, you don't often realize how much of the paper is design. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the goals of document design. And your first goal is to make a good impression on your readers, to show yourself as a professional technical writer. You want to make sure that your readers understand the structure of the document that they are reading. You need to make sure that they can access the information that they need in your document. You want to do what you can to make sure they understand the information and that they remember the information that is in your document. And so the way you design this document can help with all of these things. When you are going through design, you want to pay attention to these four main principles of document design. One is proximity. Items that are near each other on the page tend to be associated with one another by readers. Likewise, items that are far apart from one another tend not to be associated with one another. So when you put things together, make sure that you are putting things that are related to each other or associated somehow near each other instead of putting them far apart on the page. Alignment also indicates relationships between items. So things that are all aligned along the left margin versus things that are indented once or twice or whatever, those things, the alignment, the things in the same alignment tend to be treated as of the same importance, of the same significance, related to each other in some manner, that you want to pay attention. Again, that you are aligning things that should be aligned, and not putting something that is subordinate to something else in same line with it. So making use of bullet points, of indentation, and that kind of thing. And along with your headings, having your headings be aligned according to the level of importance. And then repetition, things that are repeated are emphasized, and they, tend to be seen as more important than things that are not repeated. This goes for like content itself, but also if you have different kinds of headings. So you have the same kind of heading repeated and another kind of heading repeated, that creates a pattern, a visual pattern on the page that readers can use to identify structure, identify relationships. And then the other thing you want to take into consideration is contrast. And this is where you are looking more at things like color usage or bolding, the background and that kind of stuff, making sure that your text stands out where it needs to, that there is enough white space versus, the dark space, I guess, the text space, that you have good balance there. So you want to really pay attention to these so that you don't have a page that's all crowded with random things bolded and other things randomly italicized and some things indented and some things not. And that seems like there's no order to that. Whatever you do, you want to create order and structure and make it look professional and inviting and calm and clear. along with, we're going to do these sections together, but along with the document design, you want to pay attention to the graphics that you create. There's a bit of overlap here. So when it comes to creating graphics, you are trying to attract attention and interest with any graphics that you create. You are using your graphics to communicate pieces of information. Often this is information that cannot be communicated well in words. You are using graphics to clarify and emphasize information, and this might be pretty useful in the next bullet point, where you're helping non-native speakers. A lot of times the images, the graphics can help the words make sense when you have people who are not native or confident speakers, readers of English. And then the graphics can help you address multiple audiences. Some of the benefits of including graphics are that you can show logical and numerical relationships in a way that you can't do with words. You can also show spatial information that you can't do with words. You can easily show the processes, the steps in a process, in a way that is memorable, that is easily identifiable and memorable. Graphics can often save space and they can reduce costs because you're using, one image to represent maybe 3 paragraphs of information if you had to try and explain certain things in words. One thing to be aware of is that if you have a graphic that you didn't create, but you borrowed it from somewhere else, or if you are using someone else's data to create a graphic, you have to cite your sources. If you don't, that's plagiarism, that is unprofessional, and that could cost you your job. So I told you before we would take a look at what we meant by some of these things with table and a Gantt chart and the network diagram. So we have those here. We have a simple table. These are all related to scheduling for a project, because a schedule written out in words doesn't really help readers visualize the scope of the project and how the different parts are related to each other, and how different tasks depend upon each other in such a way that, like, if one task isn't completed on time, what does that mean for the rest of the project? Can other parts continue on without that one being completed yet? Or is it like that has to be done before the next one can take place? So some of that interdependence and relationship is necessary, and you can't always do that very well, and like probably never do that very well using only words. So a table is one thing you could do, where you have, here they've got the schedule with the activity, the start date and the finish date, and they would continue on with all the different parts. But there are some limitations here. For one, you can't really visualize how long this project is going to be. We have 2 parts that are starting on the 4th of October. One seems to only be taking a few days, whereas one's taking a few months. And you kind of lose some of the ability to visualize, especially audiences that don't really have a grasp of the entire project yet. And you also don't really see any relationships or interdependence, when you start like putting these things in. It's much harder, especially in this list format, to see what parts overlap and how, and what happens if one's not done, can another be started, that kind of thing. Just, you can't really see that as well in a table. For a very short project with not very many activities, it could possibly work, but it still has these limitations. And the longer, more complex the project is, the less likely a table is going to really show the scope of the schedule of the project. A Gantt chart is this kind of bar chart sort of idea, where you are showing some of the overlap. You've got, see, they've got dates here, the beginnings of the week, and they've got, you know, this, this week, working on the platform research, and then partway through this week and the next week, you're identifying options, and you can see that these, you know, they tend to be one after the other. We don't see any actual overlapping. So we can see that, you know, this bar is longer. So this part, test options, takes longer than the task before it. The task after it is a little bit longer than the one before it, but we still don't really get a sense of how many days and what exactly is going on here. We don't really get a sense of that interdependence. For example, can you collect and analyze data before all of the testing is complete? If something happens and one of the tests can't be done, can you still collect and analyze data from other tests? Or do you have to wait until all the tests are done before you can start this? You know, there's just still some limitations here. A network diagram does give some of this information, but it is very confusing. I mean, if you're used to this kind of thing, it might be not very confusing for you. But when I look at this, I'm like, okay, there are numbers here. I can go from 1 to 2 to 3. Okay, but how do I get down here to 4? Like, they're not connected. I don't really understand, you know, why 4 is connected to 1, and not to 3. Like, it's confusing to me looking at it. So this would not be necessarily a good diagram to have in your proposal. It might be best if your team, if this is something your team works with regularly and you understand, you know, using this kind of thing within your team. But maybe your proposal, the best choice might actually be that Gantt chart, even with some of its limitations, because this main limitation of difficult to read kind of defeats the whole purpose of this particular graphic. So it's important to think about the limitations of the different graphics that you create. These are just an example related to scheduling, but you might have some other graphics that you would need to include. And thinking through what are the limitations can help you determine which ones are the best ones to include, knowing that all of them are going to have limitations. Nothing is going to be 100% perfect, but what's the best choice that you can make? All right, last thing, assignments. Your proposal memo is due in your team project folder by noon on Monday, the 20th of June. So you have the entire week to create this proposal, to perfect this proposal, and to put it in, make sure that it is ready in your team project folder by noon on Monday. Make sure that you work together on this and that it is truly a team document. And make sure that all contributors' names are on the team document. That doesn't necessarily mean that all team members' names will be on the document if there is a team member that is not contributing. So all contributors' names must be on the document. And then throughout the week, at some point, you should be reading through the material on presentations. Next week, you will be watching some videos and creating your own pitch presentation for this project, but next week we'll talk about that.